Good evening. So the last video I made, I really liked it. It was a video where I wore this strange hat. I guess it's more like a mask. And I sang and I danced and it was a music video and I also ate some food and it was really great. And if you want to check it out, the link is somewhere in the description below. So after I was done working on that video, I started to make new music. And while I was doing it, I was sitting at my keyboard feeling really creatively frustrated. So much so that I took a step back for a few days and decided to focus some of my energies on researching how creative blocks happen in the brain and maybe how to get over some of them. So this video is my weird attempt to explain to fellow artists who might be struggling how their brain might be struggling and what you might be able to do to burst through some of those creative blocks. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. This is Brainz, episode 2. So let's talk a little bit about how your brain works. Your brain sits inside of your skull and it's made up of a bunch of tiny units of life called cells, and a lot of these cells are called neurons and they look like this. The thing that makes neurons so cool and important is that different neurons communicate to each other by sending tiny pulses of electricity, and those pulses code information. So for instance, cells in the back of your brain code visual information, and cells over here in the front of your brain code for movement information. So essentially what happens when I see a cup of coffee is that the coffee goes into my eyes, or the light of the coffee goes into my eyes, and it changes the cells' firing rates in the back of the brain, and that signal then gets sent to the front of the brain where it changes the rates of firing of those signals, and then that gets sent into my hand to go and pick up the coffee and drink it. So now that we have a basic sense of how the brain works, let's talk a little bit about creativity, and let's give it a little bit of a definition. A creative idea will be defined simply as one that is both novel and useful, or influential in a particular social setting. The definition captures the cultural relativity of creativity. Using a lever to move a rock might be judged novel in a Cro-Magnon civilization, but not in a modern one. And it also captures the distinction between the creative and the merely eccentric or mentally ill, novelty without utility. Back in my early 20s, I experienced this thing called pressured speech. Pressured speech is essentially when you have a lot of stuff to say and you want to keep saying it over and over again, and it can kind of be a little bit annoying, but also somewhat fun.
Hi, Dr. Warwick. I'm really glad you're my doctor, Dr. Warwick. I've been to a bunch of other doctors and a bunch of other hospitals and some clinics and stuff, and I just think that maybe they weren't thorough enough. Like, they just need to be really complete in like all their tests and their studies and stuff.
Typically, pressured speech is associated with a thing called mania, and mania is often defined by elevated mood, freedom in which you express yourself, and a joyous exuberance that can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. And pressured speech is kind of the opposite to the creative blocks that we're talking about in this video. And in order to understand pressured speech and creative output, there are two regions that might be important. The first is the Wernicke's area, and the second is the Broca's area. The Wernicke's area is involved in understanding the meaning of speech, and the Broca's area is involved in creating the motor commands or the muscle commands to allow speech to flow out of you. And we know about these regions because when people get damage to these areas, things go awry.
And what were we just doing with the iPad? Right at the moment, they don't show a darn thing.
The iPad that we were doing. Like here?
I'd like my change for me and change hands for me. It would happen. I would talk with Donna sometimes. We're out with them. Other people are working with them. I'm very happy with them.
Good.
This girl was very good and happy. And I play golf and hit other trees. We play out with the hands. We save a lot of hands on hold for us.
So as you can see, this person had a very free-flowing output of ideas, but what they were saying didn't really make sense. Now, the converse of that is this person I'm about to show you who has damage in the Broca's area, where they can understand speech and what they're saying makes sense, but it's very labored and not well put together.
What did you used to do?
Worked Autodesk, seven sales, and worldwide, and very good. Yeah.
Okay, and who are you looking at over there when you turn your head?
That's my wife.
Okay, and why is she helping you to talk?
She's a speech.
So you have trouble with your speech?
Yeah.
And what's that called?
Aphasia.
Everything I need today, flowing out my brain this way. It's okay, okay. Fuck what you try to say, let it flow out easily, easily. If you try to make a thought, that there will be something wrong with criticism. Criticism is what you need, but what you need is also freedom.
What have we learned so far? First, we've learned that you've got a brain and different parts of the brain talk to each other. And we learned specifically about two parts of the brain that are talking to each other. The first is the Wernicke's area, which is just the part of the brain involved in detecting meaning in speech. The second is the Broca's area, which is involved in making the motor commands that go out of your mouth for speech. When you damage the Wernicke's area, what happens is you have a high degree of speech output, which means you just want to say a lot of stuff. You're generating many, many ideas, but they don't really have much meaning.
Am I talking any more to saying?
When you damage the Broca's area, you have a hard time allowing for speech to flow out of you.
Okay, and who are you looking at over there when you turn your
That's
head?
my wife.
What this means is that there are parts of your brain that generate output, and then parts of your brain that are likely involved in checking for errors and the aesthetic value of that output. So if you're making a song or you're painting a painting, what is essentially happening is you're allowing for one part of your brain to create the thing, and then another part of your brain is looking at the thing and saying, ooh, this is good, or oh, this is bad. We're checking for errors. So a creative block might just be when there is overactivity of the Wernicke's area, the part of the brain that's being critical, or if there's underactivity in the Broca's area, the part of the brain that allows for information to flow out of you. The reason this is important creatively is because of a little known theory called the Darwinian theory of creativity, which is as follows. Most ideas fall within an average range. Most people are average, and the ideas they come up with are also average. And there is ideas that are really bad over here, and then over here there are ideas that are really good. As the number of ideas increases, the likelihood of you coming up with ideas that are outside the range of normalcy also increases. This means that if I make a song, most of the time they're going to be kind of average, and say I only make 10 songs, they're more likely to fall within that kind of average range. But if I make 100 songs, some of them will be over here in this terrible low range, but that also means that some of them will be over here in this really high, amazing range. So if you have a high degree of creative output, if the Broca's area is maybe more active, then you might generate ideas that fall within this sweet spot range. So the goal of a creative person is to figure out ways to trick your brain into producing more stuff, so you're more likely to stumble upon stuff that actually has meaning. So now that we know a little bit of the theory behind creativity and creative blocks, I just want to say a few disclaimers before I go on and talk about what you might do in order to get over them. The first is that this is a very, very simple theory, and it only relies on two brain regions interacting with each other. And there are likely hundreds, if not thousands, of different regions that are interacting and at play. And within these two specific regions, there's a lot of micro interactions and micro circuitry that's really important to understand if you really want to dive deep into it. But for now, I think conceptually it's good to just think about one area as the meaning making and the critical checking system, and then another area as the output system. The second limitation is that we haven't even discussed things like mood or dopamine systems or different kinds of disorders that might lead to creative blocks. And those, I think, can be set aside. And there's a reference paper that has a lot of this stuff in it. It was written by this woman named Alice Flannery, and it's an amazing paper, so please check it out. So how do you get over creative blocks when you have them? One way comes from this book called The Artist's Way. And in it, the author talks about how every morning she wakes up and she writes stream of consciousness for 3 pages. And for those of you who don't know what stream of consciousness is, essentially it's writing without stopping and without inhibition. And the thought behind that is to get that generative side moving and to not have as much criticism and to let ideas flow out of you, so that hopefully when you then approach whatever creative idea or creative medium you work in, whether it be visual art or sound, you allow for things to flow out much more easily. The second potential thing that might help you get through the kind of creative blocks we've been talking about is to distract yourself while you're engaging in the creative process. For me, what I'll often do is I'll put a YouTube video on and I'll watch the video while my fingers are just at the keyboard, and magically stuff will start to come out because I'm not as critical and as inhibitory as I might be. This kind of leads into the third suggestion that I'd like to make, which is instead of trying to make something good, if you intentionally tell yourself, I want to make something bad, it can trick the Wernicke's area to making you produce something at all. And that's really what's important according to that Darwinian theory. It's not necessarily about the quality of what you're producing, but the number of things that you produce, because the thought is that you'll stumble upon something quality if you keep producing. So those are suggestions from me about what you might do in order to get over creative blocks. And I'm really curious about what you might think. So please feel free to let me know in the comments below how you get over your creative block. Do you just kind of let it pass, or do you actively try to engage with it? I hope this video was helpful and somewhat fun and engaging, and I really appreciate the time you took to watch it, and I hope to see you in my next video very, very soon. Thank you.